Oh no, and the guitar just keeps going madly out of tune on that string. So over here on the left we have the absolute cheapest Squier Telecaster you can buy, and here on the right, one of the best Squier Telecasters ever made. Now, can you really get a decent playable guitar for this lower price point, or is it really worth paying 3 times as much to get one of these? Well, let's find out. So in this video we're doing the cheapest Squier Telecaster versus the best. But what are these two guitars? Well, over here on the left, this green one is a Squier debut Telecaster, the absolute bottom of the line, so below the Sonic, below the Affinity, exclusive to Amazon, at least in some countries. I'll mention more about that in a minute, but this is basically the cheapest genuine Telecaster you can buy, and it goes for $129.99, but I've seen them discounted regularly down to $110. Now over here on the right, we've got my 2015 Made in China Classic Vibe Telecaster. Now these got up to about $450, and this was at the time when you could buy a Mexican standard for $500, so maybe they got a bit close in price point to those Mexicans, and Fender moved the production to Indonesia and brought the price down to about $350 to $400 depending on where you look. But really, these Chinese models are seen as one of the best quality budget guitars you could have bought in recent years, so really the top of the line that Squier have ever made since the original Japanese guitars in the early 80s. So we're basically talking 3 times the price to go from this to this, and that's quite a big difference, particularly if you're a beginner just starting out, you're not sure how much to spend on a guitar. So what do you really get by paying that extra money, and is this even worth buying when it's so cheap? Now interestingly, on the same day I ordered the debut Tele from Amazon UK, I spotted this Strat in a guitar shop in Bangkok, Thailand, where Amazon doesn't operate. So obviously these aren't exclusive to Amazon everywhere. Well, let's do a side-by-side comparison. We'll start at the headstock end and work our way down, comparing all the elements of both guitars. As we go through, I'll edit in plenty of playing so you can hear them in action, and then at the end, I'll score them both against a few key categories and give you my opinion on which is really worth buying here. But without giving too much away, you can see I've still got the sticker on this guitar, and that's because it's probably being sent back to Amazon, and the reason will become clear as we work through the video. So starting up at the headstock here then on the debut Telecaster, we get a black logo which is just kind of an outline with no infill on it. Now this is interesting in its own right, because on the Sonic series, which is about 20 quid more, you get a fully black logo. Now historically people have always said if you've got a Squier with a full black logo, then that's probably a bad one. If it's got a gold logo, then it's probably a better one. Here they're kind of somewhere in the middle of that, so even on the logos they're trying to provide some differentiation between the models. Whereas on the Classic Vibe here, we get the nice gold logo, kind of premium as far as Squier is concerned. In terms of tuners, the debut gets the modern style machine heads, and really here they're not that great, they don't feel that smooth to turn, and I had some problems tuning up as I was trying to record the guitars here. Whereas on the Classic Vibe we get some really nice vintage style machine heads. Now these are never that smooth no matter what price point you're paying at, so I guess the downside on the debut is you've got the modern style but without the modern smoothness, so definitely a vote for the vintage on the Classic Vibe there. Then looking at the nuts here, they're both plastic I think, but on the Classic Vibe it's definitely been cut lower for a nicer action. Here on the debut it's fine the way it's been cut, but there's definitely scope for it to come down just a little bit there as well. Seems a minor thing to talk about, but on the Classic Vibe we get a walnut I think truss rod plug, whereas on the debut there is no truss rod plug. Now a lot of people complain on the Mexican Japanese guitars about these supposedly horrible black plastic ones, so it's the same on the lower value Squiers, but this one doesn't even have a plug, so I don't know if that was better or worse in some people's minds, but it's fine with me. Then coming down to talk about the necks, Both of these are very slim in Telecaster terms, maybe just a fraction slimmer on the Classic Vibe, which I know is something not everyone's happy about when this is supposed to be a vintage inspired guitar, but really this one on the debut, I think this is one of the best things about this guitar. This neck feels really great to me. It's virtually kind of unfinished on the back, but just the overall smoothness and feel of it is really nice. The fret ends here, I think, are really great on this guitar, and it proves that just because you're buying a cheap guitar doesn't mean you have to have sharp frets on it, and really that's a challenge, I think, to some of the more expensive guitars. Certainly the Fenders I've got are not as good as this, so big thumbs up for the fretwork there. On the debut, of course, we get an Indian Laurel fretboard, which is a cheaper alternative for rosewood. There's a couple of kind of dark spots on it, but it otherwise kind of looks fairly light, a little bit grey compared to genuine rosewood, but it kind of feels the same, unlike, you know, the Palfero they use in Mexico, which can feel a bit kind of fuzzy compared to rosewood. So I'm kind of okay with this, you know. If I was being really, really picky, the frets could be a little bit more polished, there's a little bit of grit in them, but nothing major, and overall a really nice neck there. Over on the Classic Vibe, no issues with the fretwork here as well, and of course we get a fully glossed maple neck here. Now, a lot of players find this sticky. I'm okay with it though, feels really smooth to play to me, so it does feel like an upgrade in terms of the overall kind of premium feel of it with that finish on there. So for me, this is a plus, but for others, you might even prefer this on the debut. I'll also add that the neck pockets on both of these are super tight, super tidy, and better than on some of the Fenders I've got. Then let's look at the bodies, because here it starts to get really interesting, because on the debut we've got a thinner body compared to the usual Telecaster, and they advertise this as a feature, making the guitar lighter, and it certainly does that. There's a really noticeable weight difference between these two guitars. Now, I think this Classic Vibe's a little bit on the heavy side actually, but this one here, the debut, it really stands out about how light and comfortable it is as soon as you pick it up and hold it. So I really like that. In terms of what it's made of, Amazon lists it as the back material being wood, the body material being wood, and the top material being spruce. Clearly, that's a load of nonsense which belongs to an acoustic guitar. I think what we're dealing with here is a basswood body, or basswood, however you want to say it, and that's fine with me. In terms of the resonance of the guitar, I know it's not entirely down to the body. It's not the most resonant guitar I've ever played, but I'm kind of fine with it for the price point that it's at. As for the Classic Vibe, we get a pine body here, which is something Fender used on the original Telecasters way back in the 50s, and you will notice more recently they're using pine on some of the American guitars now that ash is getting harder to source. Now, this looks really nice as you see the grain through the finish, so this definitely feels like an upgrade in terms of the look and overall premium feel of the guitar, but maybe not an upgrade in terms of the extra weight it adds. In terms of the finish, this seafoam green on the debut is a matte finish. Now, a lot of people are going to really like that, but I'm guessing it's there as a cost saving. Personally, I would prefer it if it was a full gloss finish, but you know, I could go either way on that. I must say the colour's really nice and the finish is kind of applied perfectly, so no real complaints with that, even if it is a bit of a cost save. On the Classic Vibe, we'll get the full gloss finish, of course. Now, many people have moaned about how thick the finishes are on these guitars, along with on the neck, but the one thing I would say, I've now had this guitar for like 10 years and it's in virtually mint condition, so it's a pretty hard wearing finish, even if it does feel kind of like thick nail varnish has been put across the thing. As for the pickguard, over here on the debut we get a 3-ply white, black, white. Now that's slightly interesting to me just because the Sonic Telecaster, which is the next model up, only has a 1-ply, so there's something weird going on here about the way they're positioning this guitar. Of course, on the Classic Vibe, it's just a 1-ply, which is supposed to be vintage accurate, but clearly this is way thicker than you'd get on an original 50s Telecaster, but in some ways that's better because, you know, those old ones used to split all the time and go out of shape. So I'm good with this. It's nice over here that they've actually gone for the 3-ply though. Then the bridge is where we see a real difference between these two guitars, not only because we've got vintage versus modern, but because there's a real quality difference here, which is causing an issue. So starting with the classic vibe, we get this vintage ashtray style bridge with 3 brass saddles. They're not compensated. You can't intonate each string separately, but I've never had an issue with the intonation. So that's really a premium feature to have these brass saddles. I must say you don't get them any longer on the more modern Indonesian classic vibes. And also in this case, the strings go through the body, and that supposedly adds more sustain. I don't really buy into that too much, but again, it's just something you should be seeing on a Telecaster really, is that through body stringing. Whereas on the debut, we get this more modern top loader style bridge where the strings don't go through the body, they just come straight into the back of the bridge here, and we've got the 6 individual saddles. Now, that's fine. The problem is the quality here. I'm getting some real issues with buzzing and sitar-like sounds from this guitar, and that's because these are just low quality components and they would need some work to get rid of that noise. So you can hear there on that D string, that nasty buzzing, that sitar kind of sound. That's coming from the saddle here, where that's not been cut that well. Maybe you need some filing or some extra kind of work there to get rid of that. But it's really unpleasant, particularly on the open string, but a little bit on some of the other notes as well. And then also the high E, we've got something similar going on. Not quite as bad, but it's just more of a rattle there. But these things are not major, but they're just really annoying. And in my view, ideally these guitars wouldn't be leaving the factory with these problems going on. Oh no. And the guitar just keeps going madly out of tune on that string. And there's been a couple of kind of clicking sounds, and what's been happening actually is this saddle has been tilting down because this thread here, the screw, is just kind of clicking over it and dropping down under the pressure of the string. So I have to try and bring that back up. No, you can hear that there, you heard that go. I'm tuning up and the strings going down. Okay, so we've got something going on at the saddle. Also something must be going on up at the tuner here, because this hasn't moved again, and you heard how that was detuning. So maybe the string's just not wound on very well, I guess. But either way, it's probably not great if a beginner has this to be encountering a problem like that trying to tune up. As for the controls, they're pretty basic on both guitars. Actually, on the Classic Vibe, these knobs are really hard to turn, but the switch moves really smoothly. Whereas on this debut, the knobs move really smoothly, but this switch is like really hard to move, and it's actually quite challenging as you're playing to make pickup selections with that. So that's a bit annoying, but it all works fine. This is staying on nicely. This one, I'm in a battle to keep that on the guitar, but you know, it's not a real telly unless you've lost the pickup selector switch tip a few times, right? One thing I do like on the debut is this more Les Paul style input jack plate here, whereas the Classic Vibe's got the more traditional style. I've recently had to replace the input jack on this guitar, and that whole setup's a bit annoying. Obviously it's more vintage correct, but I like what they're doing with the debut here. And lastly, let's talk about pickups. And over here on the debut, we get ceramic single coils. Now, these are kind of the worst of both worlds in terms of they're ceramic and they're low output. They're clearly quite cheap. They sound a bit honky to my ear. Obviously, you can make up your own minds, but really not the best pickups, to be honest. But, you know, it's a pretty cheap guitar. What can we expect? They do the job. Over here on the Classic Vibe, we get Arnico 3 on this one. Now, these again, I don't think are the greatest pickups in the world. It's probably one of the weaker elements of this guitar. Particularly with tellies, it's always how good is the neck pickup in my mind. And here, it's a little bit weak for me. So not great, but they're certainly more articulate, got more character to them, a bit more top end than we see on the debut. terms of build quality, it's only a 4 for the debut because of those hardware elements letting it down, whereas the Classic Vibe, everything's pretty much perfect, even if it's not top quality components, so an 8 there. In terms of playability, both guitars are great, 7s across the board. Now in terms of sound, the debut once again, I'm only giving it a 4. It doesn't sound bad, but you know, pretty much all guitars sound decent these days, whereas the Classic Vibe, I'll give it a 6. It's not fantastic, but pretty good. As for the Vibe, the debut does score some points for that matte seafoam green finish. It's pretty cool, so it does have a vibe. As for the Classic Vibe, an 8 there, the clue's in the name. It's just that classic Telecaster look. And then as for value for money, I'm actually going to score the Classic Vibe higher than the debut. Even though it's more expensive, I just feel it's got more longevity and it's still one of the best value guitars out there at this end of the budget spectrum. So overall, it's a 5.6 for the debut and a 7.4 out of 10 for the Classic Vibe. So what are my conclusions here? Well, firstly, I think the debut is going to have to go back to Amazon just because of that sitar kind of sound from the bridge and the tuning problem I was having. It might be an easy fix, but really it's not worth my time here when I've got this easy free returns policy, so I think it just has to go back, I'm afraid. But otherwise, I do really like this guitar. I like the thin body, I like the weight, I think the neck feels great, the fretwork feels great, so I really want to like this guitar, and it's really a shame that it's got those few problems just letting it down. But everything that a person has touched, like the finishing and the neck and the fret ends, feels really great, and I'm really impressed with whoever made this. As for the Classic Vibe, these guitars really set a new standard of how good budget guitars could be when they came out, just like the Yamaha Pacifica had done maybe 15 years before. That might not be true today. I personally think that maybe Squier are leading the way and Squier are following to try and keep up in terms of what they're offering, but nonetheless, the Classic Vibes are still a really great option in my opinion. Now, of course, it's 3 times as much for this as compared to this, but probably my take is if you've got the money and you want to spend it, then the Classic Vibe is going to be a guitar that lasts with you, that grows with you.